So, a, a family member of mine recently told me that in the classic era of Doctor Who, there's a little bit of a continuity error with the unit stories, in that the unit stories had a timeline that whenever the Doctor and the Brigadier encountered each other, it would technically be 10 years in Earth's future, there or thereabouts. But then they had a little bit of a mix up later on down the line with stuff like Mordrin Undead. So I began to think to myself, well, at least the New Who timeline is a bit more simple. And then when I really started to think about it, it's like, it might be simpler, but it does jump about a lot. So I thought today I'd do a small kind of series of clips explaining parts of the New Who Doctor Who timeline. I'm going to split this up into three segments: the Russell T Davies era, the Stephen Moffat era, and the Chris Chibnall era, and roughly explain how the timeline should line up for each of those respective eras. Enjoy! To start with, we have the Russell T Davies era. Now, we know that Rose leaves to go travelling with the Doctor in 2005, especially because in the last Russell T Davies episode and the last episode of David Tennant, when he goes off to kind of see all of his companions for one last time, he goes to see Rose before she starts travelling with her, and she states that the year is January the 1st, 2005. Right, I bet you're going to have a really great year. So we know that she leaves to go travelling with him in 2005, and we know from the Series 1 episode Aliens in London that Rose went missing for an entire year while she was travelling with the Doctor. So the present for them is now 2006, which means for the remainder of the Russell T Davies era, everything is taking place 1 year in the future. I.e., the 2005 series is taking place in 2006, the 2006 series is taking place in 2007, 2007 in 2008, and the 2008 series in 2009. The only place where it might diverge slightly is when I posted this theory kind of for people on social media, for people to kind of comment on. They suggested that the 2009 specials still take place, with the present at least, in 2009, which I can kind of agree with. They stated that since the Christmas special of 2008 wasn't in modern day London, we could probably say it still takes place in 2009 from then on. So the Russell T Davies era spans from 2005 through to 2009, which it is probably the second simplest of all of the eras to understand. The Stephen Moffat era of the show is where things start to get a little complicated. Now, the Doctor first meets young Amelia Pond when she is 7 years old in 1996. We know that from the 11th hour. Then he's 12 years late before he finally comes back to her. So if we go 12 years from 1996, that would mean he next sees her when she's 19 in 2008. And then at the end of the adventure, he says that he's going to take the TARDIS off for a little spin, and he quickly comes back to her, but it's actually been 2 years later, meaning that we are now in 2010, which means that effectively the timeline has been completely reset, and we're now, when it's airing is when it's taking place. And that's supported all the more by Amy and Rory's wedding date and the date of the new Big Bang. The 26th of June 2010, a date corroborated by Matt Smith's final story, The Time of the Doctor. When he finds the crack in the clock tower, he says, a tiny sliver of the 26th of June 2010, the day the universe blew up. So that's acceptable. What's also acceptable is the Doctor's death date. The big plot point of Series 6 is that very early on we see the Doctor die and find out that's actually a future version of the Doctor. And the Tesseract crew confirmed that the Doctor's death date in this reality is April 22nd, 2011. And considering that the air date of The Impossible Astronaut was April 23rd, I believe, then it does line up. Then we start jumping around a bit. In the 2011 Christmas special, The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, when he finally leaves war-torn London and goes to visit Amy and Rory, he finds out that 2 years have passed since they last saw him, which would mean that the present day is now 2013, which at the time was still 2 years in the future. Now, assuming we follow on from that, Asylum of the Daleks presumably takes place in late 2014. I mean, if we're going on from Christmas, Asylum of the Daleks should take place in 2014. In the next episode, Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, Amy mentions that it's now been 10 months since she last saw the Doctor. So that's either very late 2014 or early 2015. For the time being, let's just say 2015. And in The Power of Three, Amy mentions that you wouldn't think it's been 10 years. Not for you or Earth, but for us. This is where things start to get a little complicated for me. I mean, she said not for you or Earth, but for us 10 years. I'm thinking to myself, does that mean it's now 2018? Does that mean 3 years have passed between here and Dinosaurs on a Spaceship? I'm currently thinking to myself, well, they were taking long gaps between each other. So, for the time being, I'm questioning this, but I'm going to say The Power of Three takes place in 2018. Now, this was where things really started to F with my mind. I thought to myself, does this mean that Series 7 Part 2 takes place in 2019, Series 8 takes place in 2020, Series 9 in 2021, and Series 10 in 2022? That would seem logical. But when I looked up when exactly the Day of the Doctor is supposed to take place, it kind of gives a very firm viewing. In its small blurb thing, it says, at the start of it, in 2013, something terrible is awaking in London's National Gallery. Which would mean that when the Doctor left the ponds but then managed to find the modern day interpretation of Clara Oswald, presumably the timeline has now once again been reset to 2013. Which would mean, once again, the series line up with the years. 2013, 2014, 2015 for Series 9, and 2017 for Series 10. This one was probably the most complicated to work out. I mean, it's either taking place a short distance in the future, for us about 2 years or so, or it's taking place at the time it was airing. So, the Moffat Era is rather complicated. While I said the Moffat Era was a little bit overcomplicated, it kind of made things really complicated for the Chibnall Era at first. Because when I was originally coming up with this, I thought to myself, well, if we're following on from the end of Series 10 and it's around 2022, does that mean that things are now taking place in around 2023 for Series 11? But it appears that the Chibnall's Era, once again, while there wasn't much to reset, he has kind of reset it for his era of Doctor Who, and he managed to do it with one simple piece of dialogue. At the end of the 2019 New Year's Day special Resolution, you would get a small section of dialogue from Ryan's dad Aaron, and it's, on the first day of the year 2019, across the land and sky of Britain, an army of unlikely friends came together to face an impossible opponent, and prevailed. Which means that the timeline, it didn't really need to be reset now thinking about it, but they did now reset it for the Jodie Whittaker era of the show, the Chris Chibnall era. Meaning, once again, it takes place in 2019, 2020 onwards. So presumably, while we do see at the start of Series 12 in 2020 that the companions are kind of taking some time to kind of reconnect with kind of family members and people they knew, presumably it's been a year and they've continued travelling. So, there we go. The entire Doctor Who timeline. The Moffat Era was a little tricky to work out. Russell T Davies Era is taking place 1 year ahead, and the Chris Chibnall Era is right now. Well, that was easier than I thought, but it was pretty complicated to work out. Anyway, what do you think the timeline of Doctor NuWho entirely is? Feel free to leave your own interpretation. Anyway, see ya.